right timing really matters. If you go in too soon and your product is really not well defined, you're going to get a lot of feedback from the agency that then you aren't able to really implement because your direction changes. But that's still agency feedback. And if and when you finally submit, you have to capture that in your submission and you have to talk about how you addressed it or why you didn't. It gets to be a very, very messy paper trail.
Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA for several decades. I was an associate commissioner at the agency, and I've authored or edited 16 books about the agency.
And I'm Shelly Garg. I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side advising companies on regulatory compliance and enforcement for the last 15 years.
Here's what to expect from FDA Watch. We have at least 2 episodes a month. We're independent. We're nonpartisan. We'll be a national forum for discussing the latest developments, trends, and issues in 4 core areas: pharmaceuticals and biologics, medical devices and diagnostics, foods and dietary supplements, and cosmetics and personal care products.
Of course, we are also discussing the overall direction of the agency, including what to expect from the new administration and what's going on with AI at the agency. If you subscribe, you should also be getting bonus episodes when there's breaking news. And as we always say, Wayne, there is quite a bit of breaking news, right?
This is one of the most breaking news times we've ever had in FDA history, I think.
Yes, that's
In
right.
this episode, we're going to focus on medical devices. We have 2 great guests to help us discuss this very important topic, and you'll meet with them in just a moment.
But first, let's get to some headlines.
From the Pharma desk, even during this transition period, FDA continues to approve new drugs. They recently approved Merilog, which is a biosimilar to Novolog, for glycemic control in adults and pediatric patients with diabetes. The agency also approved the first drug for a very rare lipid storage disease, warned about a rare adverse reaction for a drug for MS. So it's worth checking the FDA website to see the ongoing work at the FDA. But in the drug area, what I see generally is the work has been going on. From the device desk, the head of the medical device lobby, Scott Whitaker of AdvaMed, recently raised concerns over the cuts that were occurring at CDRH. CDRH was particularly hard hit by the initial round of layoffs, but there have been pushback, and many employees have been reinstated. We'll talk a little bit more about this with our guest today.
Thanks, Wayne. From the foods desk, 2.4 million cases of a popular granola bar have been recalled due to a potential presence of metal. The FDA has recently classified the recall as a Class 2 recall, meaning that if it's consumed, it could cause temporary or medically reversible adverse health consequences. With food recalls really becoming more frequent, it's really important to understand FDA classifications and have brand safety protocols in place now more than ever. Foreign object contamination and undeclared allergens are amongst the most common reasons for food recalls in the U.S. And while this particular brand has built a reputation of having allergy friendly, health forward brand, the recall really highlights food safety challenges even amongst this type of brand. From the cosmetics desk, PCPC president and CEO Tom Myers discusses how the beauty industry is innovating with AI, sustainability, and transparency. From navigating U.S. trade policies and embracing AI innovation to addressing regulatory changes and sustainability efforts, this interview offers a comprehensive look at the industry's priorities and opportunities. The interview was held shortly before PCPC's 2025 Beauty Collective Summit, which took place February 18th to the 20th at the Ritz-Carlton Key Biscayne in Miami. Check it out at the PCPC website. Now, Wayne, let's meet our guests.
Joining us today is Jennifer Newberger. She's a director with HPM, Hyman Phelps, a law firm in Washington. She spent almost 20 years providing counsel to medical device manufacturers across a wide range of FDA regulatory and other issues. She's also served in in-house roles at Apple Abbott Labs, and Cognito Therapeutics. Welcome to FDA Watch, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Wayne.
Also joining us today is Michael Gaba. Michael is vice chair of the FDA practice at the Polsinelli law firm. He has more than 30 years of experience helping companies through the complexities of FDA pre-market regulatory pathways, post-market compliance, Medicare coverage, coding, and reimbursement challenges. Welcome to FDA Watch, Michael.
Thank you very much, Shelly. Pleasure to be here.
I want to ask you both the same question. We'll soon have a new commissioner at FDA. Marty Makary is the nominee. He is a practicing surgeon, so his OR is regulated by CDRH, everything in there. Let me ask you both, what are the priorities he should address in the medical devices area beyond assuring the adequacy and expertise of the staff? What are the key substantive issues facing medical device regulation? Let me start with you, Jennifer, and ask you that question.
Sure, Wayne. Thanks for the question. I think one of the key things that he really needs to start to address is how to enable innovative products to market faster. I think there has been a lot of talk about that in the agency over the last decade or so, but I'm not really seeing it come to fruition in many cases. There's a breakthrough program that's been well established. Very few products that get breakthrough designation actually make their way to market. I've seen a lot of challenges in clinical trial requirements, and it seems that the expectations on many of the review teams, not all, but many of the review teams at CDRH with respect to what is needed in order to demonstrate safety and effectiveness of a device is simply out of step with what especially smaller companies bringing a lot of these products to market can do and frankly need to do in order to make that showing.
Michael, same question.
It's a great question, and I would agree with a lot of what Jennifer said. I think there are times when the reviewers tend to impose perhaps more than necessary requirements in the pre-market phase of getting products through the FDA, particularly devices. And, years ago now, the agency put out a guidance on trying to strike that right balance between what's needed in the pre-market setting to get to market and then what can be accomplished in the post-market setting, and the importance of striking that balance. The guidance has been out for a couple of decades now, and I haven't seen much change in that. I spend most of my time debating with the agency around what can be done, or if it's needed at all, to give the agency reasonable assurances that a device is safe and effective for the intended use. The other thing I want to mention quickly that Jennifer alluded to, and I know it's been talked about, and I know we're going to be talking about AI as a regulated device, but I know that the agency has been kicking around the idea of trying to utilize AI to perform some of the functions that don't require a lot of subjective analysis by reviewers. So, for instance, can they utilize AI to review the adequacy of the application, to address whether or not a refuse to file or refuse to accept a decision can be made? That strikes me as a check-the-box exercise that could potentially be handled by AI in a much faster way that would help facilitate getting the reviews done. We'll see if that happens.
So I just want to follow up with both of you on that, on your response. What is needed? More training, more direction to the reviewers to address some of these issues? Michael, and then Jennifer, if you would.
Yeah, I think more training is probably going to be helpful, but given where we are in today's climate, I think it's going to be important for Dr. Makary to also, one, be able to commit to the agency, CDRH people that life is good, and to try to keep them calm and focused on the job in front of them, while at the same time he's going to have to assess their needs, because as you indicated, in the last few weeks there's been firings and rehirings, and it's not really clear that all those people are going to really come back. I think even we're seeing that some of the leaders that were fired have decided not to come back, and so he's got to assess their needs to make sure they've got the right balance of headcount as well as expertise to get the job done. I'm concerned that's going to be a significant issue that he's going to have to face on day one.
Jennifer?
I think there's a couple things. First, and maybe this is oversimplification, some of it is just that the review teams need to actually follow the guidance documents that have been in place for so long. I think Michael made a really good point, right? There is a benefit risk guidance for de novo classifications that talks about that balance between pre-market and post-market. And Michael, it sounds like you've had similar experiences to what I've had, and I know my colleagues have had, which is that when you actually try to leverage FDA's own words in discussion to say, look, you acknowledge that for some of these novel devices, there's not going to be an opportunity up front to have all the effectiveness data that you might want, but you have a strong safety showing, you have effectiveness that favors benefit over risk. Let's get it on the market. We'll collect the data. We want to have an open dialogue with the agency. So some of it is really just that. I've seen rejections for breakthroughs come through with standards that would be ridiculous to impose for a breakthrough device and are nowhere in the guidance. And so I think some of it is, I don't know if it's training or just, hey guys, these are things that you have decided are actually the right way to approach bringing, in particular, novel. I'm really focused on this, or the novel devices, as we're talking here about AI, but that's if you actually do what you wrote, what you said 10 plus years ago, I think we would actually be in a better place. And then the second piece, and again, I don't know how this would work today, but I do think that it would be really helpful for some of the teams to actually hear from, again, smaller companies, like, what does it take to actually run a clinical trial? How much knowledge do the review teams actually have for that real life practicality, from cost, time, the challenges? And again, I am absolutely not suggesting that the bar be lowered from a safety and effectiveness perspective, right? There are clearly standards that need to be shown, and the review teams are made up of highly intelligent, very capable people. But I think that sometimes the requests are what we would love in an ideal world, but they're not necessary. And so I think that there's a practical gap there, and its lack of understanding what it actually takes to make it happen on the ground. I think that would be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah. Well, we'll see whether Dr. Makari, who again is a practicing surgeon and whose OR is regulated by CDRH, basically, has a view on that when, if and when he does become commissioner. Let's shift gears. Focus on one topic: software as a medical device. Let's begin with Jennifer. Jennifer, in the evolution of the FDA's regulation of software, the pivotal date would probably be 2016 with the passage of the Cures Act, which included the provision whereby Congress defined what types of software were outside the FDA's purview. That was a decade ago. What are your thoughts on the evolution of regulatory oversight of software as a medical device?
Yeah, so I think, even years before that, FDA had issued their guidance on mobile medical apps and how to start thinking about that. And my view was actually that Congress had to do what they did in the Cures Act because FDA was being a little too wishy-washy and trying to overregulate. And so if you think about that Congress managed to act more quickly than the agency, we can ponder that for a few seconds, but that's probably a topic for another day. So I think the Cures Act obviously was definitely instrumental, but there was, FDA did have a position on this before. And what I've seen is that there was this effort at the beginning to think very practically about what should be in, what should be out, and why. But I think what we've seen in issuance of the guidance documents to implement the Cures Act provisions is that they've taken a much more narrow scope than was originally intended, which would be interesting to challenge now in light of Chevron going away and various other things. But I think they've sort of swung the other way and are now looking to overregulate again in spaces that Congress did not intend for them to be regulating under Cures.
Michael, let me ask you a question, ask you the same question, but also in light of the recent reductions at CDRH, which recently is focused on digital health and AI, what can we expect from CDRH in terms of getting the job done in the review process?
Yeah, It's a great question, Wayne. I think it's inevitable that with a thinner staff, particularly in the digital health space, companies that are bringing their applications forward need to be prepared for delays. I just don't see them getting it done. And if they're going to, they could move quickly, but then they run the risk of to meet deadlines under MDUFA. But they run the risk of not having done the job in a thorough way to ensure that these devices are safe and effective for their intended use. So I do think companies need to be prepared for delays. And, the FDA is very artful at communicating at the last moment within the timeframes as a way to say they met the deadline because they communicated. But those communications are more likely to be more about, hey, it's still under review, or we have some questions. And I could see it really getting dragged out. The other thing I want to mention about this, though, and I thought Jennifer made a great point about just follow the guidance. We've seen this before this most recent election that led to these reductions in force and the rehirings and a lot of sort of consternation among reviewers. But even before then, whenever there's been turnover on a review team during a review, invariably it sets back the sponsor of that application because they're following a certain path dictated by a group of 5 people, let's say, and 2 of those people get moved on to some other project. There's turnover for any reason, and the new people say, oh, well, that's interesting, but we want something else. And so I could see that getting exacerbated with the reduction in force. And it really means that Dr. McCary has to send a message that there has to be consistency even in the face of those turnovers. And that's where following the guidelines that Jennifer referenced makes a whole lot of sense. But even maybe just a rule that internally, if you join a review team while a review is underway, you inherit the pathway and the decision-making of your predecessors. I think that's got to be really reinforced right now in light of the thinner workforce.
Thanks, Michael. What's your advice to your clients when it comes to interacting with current FDA officials in this evolving environment?
Be very careful. Be careful what you wish for or ask for, particularly in ways that can create real problems for you. In other words, the agency has a number of vehicles by which they encourage regulated industry to engage with them. One of them is the 513G program. And invariably, when I get approached by clients, it's after they've already submitted a 513G and they don't like the answer they got. And then they say, hey, can you help me untangle this mess? And I do my best to do that, and sometimes with success. And it's, that's an example of a program where the agency is encouraging people to approach them to ask questions like through the 513G to help them identify the proper designation of a product. And it can happen certainly with AI, with software. If somebody's on the wellness line and they would prefer not being regulated by the FDA, sometimes they get bad advice to go to the FDA and ask that question because, as Jennifer said, they're trying to reach out and take more on. And so I remind clients that you don't need to use that process. You can come to people like myself or Jennifer or others in the space and get their legal advice as to where they are on that continuum and help them navigate it to either be in it or outside of it, depending on what their business model is.
Yeah, I agree, Michael. I think we always counsel clients it's better sometimes to ask for forgiveness than permission. And that if you have a defensible position on file, sometimes that can be sufficient, as opposed to getting an answer through a 513G that you don't like. So I agree with you. Um, Jennifer, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree completely. I would say rarely. I might actually say never advise clients to do a 513G
Yeah,
unless there is some business reason that is mandate. If you've got investors or a board that are we absolutely want this, and even then I would push back heavily. I think there are other ways to get, certainly in the software space, some less formal but perhaps more flexible advice, right? The digital health
right.
team has an email set up for this purpose. And that's something that, again, could be submitted by a third party, by consultants, by counsel, where you can describe the product in great detail, get feedback without even necessarily identifying the company, and at least get a sense of where the team is when it comes to software and whether it would be regulated, how it would be regulated. It's not binding, but I think that's the point, right? Is that you want it not to be binding. Like Michael, we've had a number of clients who come after they had a 513G, they got an opinion that they didn't want, which is that it's regulated. I think 513Gs almost always end up in a more conservative position. And it's very, very hard to unring that bell. I think, the other thing about interaction, of course, is pre-subs, which we could talk about for a very long time, but it's the come early and come often, right? I think we hear that a lot from agency officials. And I think the question is like, to whose benefit, right? I do think that there is a benefit to hearing from officials fairly early, but the right timing really matters. If you go in too soon and your product is really not well defined, you're going to get a lot of feedback from the agency that then you aren't able to really implement because your direction changes. But that's still agency feedback. And if and when you finally submit, you have to capture that in your submission and you have to talk about how you addressed it or why you didn't. It gets to be a very, very messy paper trail. So I think, again, it's one of those topics that you want to talk to Michael or to me or to somebody in the space to say, like, here's where we are. What do you see as the best regulatory path forward? When do we go? And on what topics? It's not a comprehensive, here's everything we're thinking, FDA, give us your feedback. It should be, this is the clinical study we are planning for this indication. These are the questions that we have and feedback on that scope. And you want to keep it somewhat constrained.
Yeah, and if I may, Shelly, just to add to something Jennifer just said, what I often tell clients is they need to remember that the way the whole act is designed, it's intended to give regulated industry the first shot at getting it right.
Right.
And then the FDA can always come in and sort of second guess, do inspections, et cetera, to question some decision making. But at the end of the day, what the FDA cares about is behavior modification. So I think if there's as you said, a paper trail and a good faith effort to get it right, at the end of the day, I believe the agency will work with regulated industry to come into compliance, which usually means getting the proper application in, et cetera. But companies should not be scared to make that decision in the first instance. That's where I think the 513G sort of is held out as some sort of panacea for industry, but in fact, it's not, and they need not go there. I agree with Jennifer. I've never advised the client to go for 513G. In fact, when it ever comes up, I tell them, no, don't do it. So,
Yeah, I agree. I think it also may depend on a company's appetite for risk. If they're more risk averse, more conservative, then perhaps one of those, regulatory submissions from pre-sub or 513G could be of value. But yes, by and large, I think I agree with you.
Yeah. We've seen delays. We're going to see more delays likely, but based on what we've just seen in terms of personnel. Besides banging your head against the wall, what do you do when there are delays? What is the recourse when there's a delay in some of the officials getting back to you, or in the processing of an application? Jennifer, let me start with you.
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure that there's a great answer to this question, unfortunately. I would usually, I start with obviously whoever the appropriate person is on the review team. If you don't hear back, I'm always comfortable pinging a supervisor or a manager, because sometimes it's like maybe the person's out, maybe they're not monitoring their email, maybe something's happening that I don't know about, right? So it's not like hey, your person is like being lazy and not getting back to me. It's not that approach, right? It's just like, hey, we've got like our MDUFA deadline is coming up. We haven't heard, or it has passed. We haven't heard. I think they're still trying to hedge pretty close to those MDUFA deadlines. But I think it's reasonable to escalate it up and just to ask for a status update. And usually that will be enough to be able to get somebody to help. If there's real problems, you can always use the ombudsman. I think the ombuds team is very, very good. And they are always willing to help to the extent that they can, right? They're not going to provide substantive feedback on a submission, but they can talk about whether there are certain things happening maybe that we don't know about that might be causes of the delay. So I would definitely encourage using the ombudsman at CDRH as well.
Yeah, if I may, I agree with Jennifer. I don't think there's an easy answer. If somebody's going to, drag their feet or go offline for a bit, it's hard to bring them back. But I agree. You kind of work your way up the food chain to get their attention. And I think what I try to do is early on in the process, establish a certain cadence of communications that is at a pace that will intended to keep the process moving. And therefore, it's easier to identify when somebody on the review team is not getting back to you. So there is a framework known as interactive review, which can be engaged in by the agency when they so choose. I try to treat everything as an interactive review as a way to keep things moving. Again, I agree with Jennifer. You work your way up the chain of command. You certainly don't leapfrog over anybody. And I also agree, though, that the ombuds team is a nice vehicle to use to help get attention to an issue when you feel like you're not getting the right airtime with the reviewers.
Yeah, and the ombudsman will deal with process, not with substance. I think
Yes, that's correct.
that needs to be made clear.
Correct.
Their role is not to look at an application and make a judgment about safety and effectiveness. Their job is to make sure that the process is working correctly.
Correct. And so when you get these delays, that's about the process not moving. And so, yeah, they can be helpful that way. They have been for me, certainly.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also, like you said, though, very important to kind of go slowly up the food chain, because the last thing you want to do is to tick off your reviewer and have a bad rapport. So so I think slowly building on that is really important.
Well, part of that rapport building is, in this particular time, is when you have meetings scheduled with the FDA, and I've had to do this in the last several days, and I think this is going to be true for some time, is that you want to check in and see how they're doing. Remember that we're all people, and first off, make sure they're okay, and then you can get around to confirming that your meeting's still scheduled.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Michael and Jennifer. We're going to take a quick break right now, but please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
And we're back. We're talking about medical devices with Jennifer Newberger and Michael Gaba. Let's start with you, Michael. I want to talk about clinical trials, and specifically with regard to software. What are you seeing the FDA requirements are in terms of clinical trials there?
Well, good question, Wayne. I think most software is regulated through the 510K process, so Class 2 moderate risk devices. Historically, those applications did not require clinical data, but I think depending on the level of sophistication of the software, and it keeps getting more and more sophisticated, particularly with generative AI embedded in the software, we're seeing the agency require more and more clinical data to help support the conclusion that this device is safe and effective for the intended use. So I think it gets back to how for the sponsors, they have to be very thoughtful about how they craft their intended use, and to the extent that intended use is going to certainly trigger the need for clinical data, they need to be very mindful, and I think be willing to negotiate with the agency over what's going to be needed to get that clearance. Again, this sort of gets back to how much of the work can be pushed to the post-market setting versus pre-market. But again, it's a function of the risk profile of what the AI is intended to do.
Jennifer?
I agree. I mean, I think a lot of this is where you've got the novel software products that are coming in through de novo, and then they will need clinical data. And I think part of the challenge is FDA's desire to see everything in terms of an RCT, right? You want a randomized, controlled, blinded study, sham devices, And sometimes, again, those expectations don't really align with the software. It can be very difficult to blind someone as to whether their software is actually an investigational device or standard of care, right? That can often be very normal. And then the question is, well, if they're going to know that it's standard of care, then you get into bias issues and a bunch of other things. And I think this is one of those things we talked about earlier, that having the teams understand how complicated the execution of a study like this can be and to what end, right? Like, you can use historical controls. You can use someone as their own control group, right? Like, there's ways to do this without this sort of standard RCT concept. And so I think there's more education needed around that, because I'm not really seeing treatment of software differently. And I understand why. It's still a device, the same standards apply. But practically, it's a very different type of study.
I want to ask you about AI. CDRH lost some important people during this recent period, and I'll characterize it as a setback in terms of their expertise with regard to AI. Looking at it from your standpoint as outside counsel and from your client standpoint, what do we collectively need to do in order to make sure that FDA has that expertise and implements it and can keep pace with the changes that are occurring in the industry itself? Jennifer, let me start with you there.
Yeah, that's a very loaded question, Wayne. It's a good one. I think apart from hiring people back with the expertise, which would obviously be what I hope to see, or bringing in additional people with that expertise, this comes, I think, back to this concept of training, but in a different way. And I wonder if some of this, and I will acknowledge that I haven't done this, and I'm just thinking about this now, but we tend to think of pre-subs as, I have a product and a plan, and here's what I want to do. But there's also this concept of like the informational pre-subs, right? Where you can sort of tell FDA what you're thinking. You're not necessarily really asking for feedback on any particular item. And I wonder if that couldn't potentially be used to at least start to educate the team that will be looking at your product about how it works, some of these basic concepts, the key things that you think will be important for them to understand as they're viewing it down the road, right? So that when you come in with a pre-sub that goes into a lot of detail about how the AI is actually working, they maybe have some background already on those. I mean, it is industry helping train, but that might be an opportunity for clients to engage with FDA, to talk about what they're seeing in AI, to talk about what maybe shouldn't be regulated, how to think about clinical data for these types of products. And that could be an opportunity, I think, for some companies to do that.
Michael?
Yeah, I think what we saw in the recent weeks with the RIF and then the rehirings is that I think those rehirings came about because the two major trade associations in the device world, AdvaMed and MDMA, stepped up and messaged pretty clearly to the administration that they made a mistake here, because about half of the 200 CDRH employees that were originally let go were supported with MEDUFA funds. So there's no hit to the federal budget. You're not reducing the spend by hiring people who are paid with user fees. And so I think that was part of the rationale for bringing people back. And I think it's really incumbent upon the industry, and as represented by those associations, I think they're best equipped to do it. Certainly individual companies can do this too, but those trade associations really, I think, need to establish, I know they're working to establish, a good line of communications with Dr. McCary and the other leadership within HHS to really hone in on the importance of having the rightly trained people and people with the right backgrounds and sophistication to know what they're looking at, particularly in this AI space. It's evolving so quickly that it's going to be a real challenge. But I think that's where Capitol Hill can come into play. It's not just the trades talking to the administration, but it's also the trades talking to people on Capitol Hill. Because let's not forget, MEDUFA and all the UFAs are acts of Congress. It's federal law, so they've got something to say about that. And of course, the industry cares that with all these firings, these MEDUFA goals are not going to be met, because they're not requirements. By the way, they're aspirational. They expect best efforts for hiring the right people, the right numbers, and making deadlines. It's all about trying your best, but that's looking a little bit suspect at the moment.
Do you see any benefit in the industry, for example, just an idea that I've floated to uh, uh, aggressively reach out to FDA and offer to educate them about AI? I know in the pharmaceutical area over the years, as clinical trials have changed, as adaptive trials have come in, there's been an outreach to the agency and said we can help you. I'm not, make sure you're up to date. I just want to get your both reaction to something that's a little bit more aggressive than what I see right now.
Well, I'm happy to go first if you like. I mean, I can tell you that I think it's a great idea. I actually think, and I haven't thought about this much until you just brought it up, Wayne, but I do think under the current administration, they'd be much more open to that idea to have people who are in industry who actually know these technologies, and particularly with AI and software, to come in and educate staff. I will tell you, though, historically, we've done this. Fidley, the Food and Drug Law Institute, which is, of course, the professional society for FDA lawyers, used to go in with people like myself. I've done it to train new hires. For me, it was, of course, telling them about medical device law and how the system works and operates and all that. That programming got phased out because of a view that created some sort of conflict. That this was because I work on behalf of industry and I go in and I educate them about the 510K process, et cetera, that's somehow a bad thing. So that kind of got killed a while back, but maybe it'll come back in this administration.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think I did a couple of those trainings as well back in the day. I'd forgotten about that, but now that you say that, I remember doing that. And I think, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because one of Secretary Kennedy's biggest concerns about all the UFAs is that potential conflict, and does it seem that FDA is somehow beholden to industry as a result of industry paying their salaries? I think we can all agree that that does not appear to be the case, that we all have plenty of clients who are getting submissions rejected and many who get them accepted, but it doesn't seem to be user fee related. So I wonder if there would be, I think historically I would agree with you, Michael, but I do wonder here if that would be seen as almost more of this industry influence, industry coming in and giving its view of what AI looks like and how AI should be regulated, or if they would be open to it. I think it's a great idea. I just wonder kind of which way the wind would blow on that right now.
Well, if I may, I'll just say that I think you're right. I mean, certainly that's Secretary Kennedy's view. I think it may very well come down to the relationship that McCary establishes with Kennedy, because we know that, well, they're both contrarians. Dr. McCary is very focused on evidence and data, but again, for the reviewers to know what evidence and data they're looking at, they need to be well educated, and so that should be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Well, we'll leave it there for the time being. We're going to turn briefly to our resource link segment. We provide you with some valuable links that you might want to check out. So, Shelly, let's share them with our audience right now.
Will do, but I want to first point out that these links will be included on our website, fdawatch.net, so no need to write anything down.
Let's first look at our Pharma resource link. There was an interesting warning letter that was issued to an Indian drug manufacturer for failing to respond to a request from FDA for certain information. I'm not going to say you seldom see that. You virtually never see a manufacturer proactively failing to respond to a request for information. The warning letter is worth a look, and it is, as Shelly said, on our website. The link is fdawatch.net. In the medical devices area, from the Associated Press, there was an interesting story about the FDA's move to rehire medical device staffers. Again, we come back to the firings and the rehirings. Lots of news stories about that. They did mention the lobbyist interaction. We've talked about that. And this is something that we who are interested in medical devices need to continue to monitor. And again, there's a link to the story on FDAWatch.net.
Thanks, Wayne. In terms of our food resource link, following Jim Jones's mid-Feb resignation as FDA Deputy Commissioner for the Human Foods Program, attorney Kyle Diamantis has emerged as his expected replacement, according to Bloomberg. Diamantis most recently served as a partner at Jones Day, a firm in Miami, but was also listed as a special assistant at FDA and the DHHS employee directory. And finally, let's turn to our cosmetics link. From Cosmetics Design USA, FDA's proposed formaldehyde ban remains unpublished as the industry awaits clarity. Following up on our last episode's resource link regarding FDA's proposed ban on formaldehyde and formaldehyde releasing chemicals and hair products, industry expert and attorney Allison Stevenson told Cosmetics Design that pushback from market interests could be delaying the ban, despite FDA's projected release date of March this year. FDA has not provided any reasoning for the delay. And on that note, Wayne, it's time to thank Jennifer and Michael for being such excellent guests in this episode. We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And Shelly, this is important. If any of our listeners want to suggest or be a guest on the show, or if you want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor or just comment, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net. That's INFO at fdawatch.net. And definitely check out our website, fdawatch.net. Again, I repeat, fdawatch.net. And finally, if you're so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, it really does make a difference. And remember to follow us and subscribe. That's the only way to make sure you won't miss a single episode of FDA Watch.
And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.